The oldest anarchy server in Minecraft has a reputation for many things, but one of them is the expansive highway systems actively maintained by the players. But while the main highways are under constant construction, the diagonal highways are a different story. Receiving far less travelers, the quality of these abandoned roads range from acceptable to dangerous at times. In some places, it's barely a road at all. With no construction crews, these highways only get extended by random travelers from time to time. I was curious, how far do each of these bizarre highways actually go in the overworld? I had a personal bet with someone. I didn't think a single one of them went beyond 100k diagonally. So to find out, I decided to do a challenge. I would travel all 4 of the diagonal highways to see how far they went. Instead of using my main account, which would make the journey way too easy, I would do it on a fresh account that had never logged in before. So not only would I be traveling, but I would have to stay alive as well. So come along with me as I travel all 4 of the diagonal highways on 2b2t, witnessing the spectacular ruins, having a few brushes with death, and meeting some odd characters. Now, which highway do we start with first? Well, I actually wanted to go in reverse order from the least traveled diagonal to the most. To get this information, I got into contact with 2b2t legend Leisure, who was the mastermind behind multiple exploits over the years that actively tracked players in real time. While these exploits no longer work, Leisure is still sitting on the data that was taken while they were active. I asked if he knew which of the diagonal highways were the most and least popular during that time. He revealed that the popularity of each diagonal actually changed week to week, but by the end of the collection period, generally, this was the order. Southwest was the least traveled. Just barely ahead of it was northeast, then it was northwest, and the most popular was the southeast. So that is the order I was going in. And since I had a bet with someone, I had to travel each one until they either ended or I reached the 100k by 100k milestone, which diagonally is actually over 141,000 blocks. I was banned from using the Nether unless I died and needed to get back to my body. With this massive journey ahead of me, it was time to log in and head southwest. After joining the server, I found myself right at the heart of spawn. I made sure to walk instead of run in order to conserve hunger. Some of the big lava casts proved tricky to navigate, but I managed to get down to ground level where I found a fish swimming around that I could use for food. After walking a few hundred blocks, I managed to locate the southwest diagonal highway, and my first journey began. Walking down the road, I quickly found a griefed base. Being directly on the highway and this close to spawn, it was inevitable for it to be destroyed. There were some logs nearby though, so I made sure to craft some basic supplies. I saw a spider approaching me, so I hoped it would drop at least 2 string for a fishing rod, and sure enough, it did. After killing another spider at around 3,000 blocks, I saw a cabin in the distance, so I went to investigate. It was clearly a spawn base at one point, but had fallen into ruin. Surprisingly, there were horses and other animals nearby, so I decided it would be worth it to go fishing to try and get a saddle. Being on horseback would make the journey far less tedious, so I spent the next hour fishing in the server's laggy conditions. During a rainstorm, I got super lucky and actually managed to get one. After picking out the fastest horse I could find, I was ready to hit the road. The journey had already become much easier, but at around 4,000 blocks, there was a massive lava cast that prevented horse travel, so after going around it, I discovered a somewhat intact farm. To be directly on the highway and still have crops was pretty unusual, especially so close to spawn, but this was the least traveled highway after all, so it made sense. I hopped back on my horse and continued to head southwest. The road was still made out of obsidian, but I wondered how long that was going to last. I soon found myself at the 5,000 block milestone. It was a massive set of platforms completely submerged in water, and this was likely done to prevent griefing. This strange build towered all the way past the clouds. Especially with the vines hanging down, it was a very interesting find. After taking one last look, I was back on the road. From here, the highway turned into mainly cobblestone and started becoming very uneven in some places. After riding past a massive fire field, I found another set of ruins at around 6K. Looking around, a few of the structures could be seen intact, but the majority of it was a crater, unrecognizable. There were no valuables left, so I continued. From here, the highway became tricky to navigate on horseback in some places, but these elevated bridges carried me past gigantic lava casts. In the shadow of these casts, I ended up finding a mostly ungriefed melon farm. It was in much better shape than the previous farm I had come across. A few hundred blocks later, in the distance, I saw a lone skeleton horse. Skeleton horses are valuable on anarchy servers because withers will not attack them due to their undead status, and their ability to run underwater without forcing the rider to dismount is pretty useful. But sadly, this one was too slow, so I continued with my regular horse. At 7.5K, I managed to find another massive farm that, despite being right on the highway, was in great shape. To look this good despite being relatively close to spawn, I knew this highway didn't have many travelers. Continuing southwest, right next to the path was a small building. The 7777 Tavern, named after the coordinates it was built on. Sadly, there were no beverages, but there were plenty of signs left by all the players that had come before me. Even in a desolate wasteland, there was genuine connection between people. It was a nice find. From here, the road actually devolved into a dirt path. One area was nothing more than random cobblestone and torches built on ice. I was actually surprised at how quickly the lack of infrastructure on this highway seemed to reveal itself. Soon I found myself at the 10K milestone, which really wasn't much to look at, just a tall lava cast with a big layer of obsidian in the sky. But I was happy that I was able to get this far out so easily on a fresh account. I wondered just how far this highway was going to go, despite being the least traveled. Well, around 11,000 blocks, I found something I wasn't expecting. I came across some signs that had apparently marked the end of the highway from just 1 year ago. I thought maybe it was a mistake of some kind or someone was trolling, but more signs informed me that a player named Carpenter had taken it upon themselves to try and extend the highway. So maybe I really was getting close to the end. But soon, more ruins came into sight. It seemed like either a temple or cathedral of some kind, mainly made of stone. Like all the other ruins we had come across, I wondered what the story was behind this place. It definitely gets the imagination going, but getting back to traveling, as my horse took me further southwest, suddenly the road ended, with a sign to mark the true end of the highway. Was this right? Even though it was the least traveled highway, I wasn't expecting it to end this quickly. Just to make sure, I searched a few hundred blocks ahead to check and see if the highway had just been griefed. On my way, I accidentally wandered into one of the largest pillager raiding parties I had ever seen in Minecraft. Since I had no good gear, I made sure to keep my distance, but they were not happy to see me. After searching farther ahead and finding nothing, I could confirm that the end of our first highway, the southwest diagonal, was only at 12K, with a true distance of 16,970 blocks from 0-0. The road was much shorter than I was expecting, but rather than teleport back to spawn via death, I decided I would just turn around with my horse. This would prove to be a mistake though, as on 2b2t, anything that can go wrong eventually will go wrong. After exploring some additional areas on the way back, while I was riding on a cobblestone bridge, the server decided to kick me off my horse randomly. Well, at least I was back at spawn now, but little did I know that this next highway would be much, much longer. After returning to spawn and losing all of the gear I had already acquired, the first thing I did was kill a few fish swimming around to get some food. I crafted some basic supplies and used them to fight my way out of spawn. I did take some time to see the sights though, such as the massive lava pillars littered all over the place. But soon, I found myself at the start of the northeastern diagonal highway. Little did I know that this highway would be far more dangerous. I spent the first few thousand blocks just trying to avoid hazards and manage my hunger. Not far from some ruins, I managed to find some exposed iron ore which I could use to make a shield. After catching some more food and smelting the ore, I would be set for a while. Around 3,100 blocks, I saw some ruins nearby, and to my surprise, it was now a massive pit going all the way down to bedrock. Falling into this thing would likely spell trouble, so I admired it from the surface before continuing on. I'm glad I crafted a shield because skeletons were all over the highway tunnels. There was no avoiding them. The mobs were actually a greater threat than being attacked by players, it seemed, so I had to stay on my toes. For the next 2,000 blocks, all I came across were griefed farms and unrecognizable ruins. But at least the road was still obsidian. Upon reaching the 5K milestone, I realized that it was almost identical to the one from the previous highway. Here, I was able to find a name on a sign, J Feather Alt. They seemed to be the one building these things. It was safe to assume that we would be seeing them on the remaining highways as well. So after looking around a little bit, I hit the road again. For the next few thousand blocks, it was mainly more ruins, but I did find what was left of a bamboo hut, so I used it as a rest area to cook some food. Once I reached the 7K milestone, I was met with an upside-down obsidian pyramid, a massive hall of nether portals, as well as the ruins of a city nearby. Still no civilization though. At 8,100 blocks, the highway went from obsidian to stone, and not long after, straight ahead was a giant obsidian castle completely submerged in water. From a distance, it was both imposing and awe-inspiring. There was a tunnel leading through the water, so naturally I used it. But after fighting a few creepers, I suddenly realized that it wasn't just the castle. The entire highway and surrounding areas were also submerged. This was about to be a massive headache. Without a respiration helmet, the best I could do was move from air pocket to air pocket. For over 1,000 blocks, I slowly made my way through, taking it slow and steady. One wrong move and I would be back at spawn. While waiting in an air pocket, I saw what appeared to be a massive dome in the distance, so I decided to investigate. Once I was in, I surveyed the area, and while there were a lot of craters, the dome itself seemed to be holding strong for the most part. Underwater builds are always a noble endeavor, especially on this server. I slowly continued on the highway, but the mobs were becoming a problem. After having multiple tridents thrown at me, I managed to find the other end of the grief tunnel, so I had some breathing room, literally. But the entire region remained submerged. I can't imagine the amount of work that went into causing this level of flooding over such old terrain. Eventually, the tunnel ended upon reaching the 10K milestone, and I was glad to be back on dry land. For a while, there wasn't much to see, but at around 12.5K, I managed to find the first intact base of the highway, a small cabin with berry bushes and some supplies. I only took a few things that I felt would be useful, but left most of it. Now we were starting to find the good stuff. At this distance, the highway was starting to fall into disarray with random blocks on the path. But it had already gone longer than the previous highway, so I knew there was plenty of distance left to cover. Upon entering a lava cast, I was met with flowers on both sides. For once, it didn't feel like I was trying to survive in a wasteland, but soon, it was back to the usual scenery of utter destruction. As I continued, it was pretty funny to see modern sea creatures like dolphins in terrain that was at least 15 years old. Appropriately, I soon found myself at the 15K milestone, which was a lovely rest stop complete with farm and shelter. At this point, I was still on foot. I figured going through the hassle of getting a saddle for a horse again wouldn't be worth it if this highway was going to end at any moment, so stubbornly, I kept hoofing it. At 17,300, I came across a base that had been griefed long ago. Vines were now hanging down from the buildings, so these had been here a while. On one hand, it's very somber to explore ruins like these, but on the other hand, these builders knew the risks when they built directly on the highway. It is what it is, but still a cool find. At this distance, old chunk borders were becoming a common sight, especially right off the highway. At the 20K milestone, I was met with a very bizarre sight. Massive lines of red concrete littering the sky. There was no rhyme or reason to it, but finding weird stuff like this is why highway travel is so interesting in the first place. From here, the terrain changed wildly, going from large ocean one minute to frozen wheat farms the next. There was definitely plenty of variety. At 23K, I saw a small campsite off the side of the road, so I figured I could use it to cook some food. Big mistake. While it was cooking and I was getting some aerial footage on the side of the highway, I got ambushed. Back to spawn. But luck was on my side. Upon entering the nether to get back to my body, a kind stranger randomly gave me an elytra, fireworks, golden apples, and totems, which I was able to use to return to my body in less than 12 minutes. After crafting some proper armor, I stored the elytra, fireworks, and other loot in the nearest e-chest because to use them at this point would feel like cheating. I wanted to continue on foot or by horse, but I did keep a totem on hand for emergencies. From here, the oceans were becoming larger and larger. Upon reaching land at 24K, I found something completely unexpected. A roadside attraction called Plankhenge, completely ungriefed. To build something like this, you have to ask, is it creativity or insanity? Probably a mix of both. I always appreciate builds that feel like actual roadside tourist attractions you would find in real life. As the road continued over ocean, I really began to miss having a horse. Sooner or later, I would likely have to fish for another saddle, but while I was contemplating, I wasn't paying attention to the road, and suddenly, a wither spotted me. It started chasing me immediately. As I fled, it remained hyper-aggressive. I did not have the gear to be dealing with this right now, so my only hope was to run. It managed to pop my totem, so I kept swimming. My only chance was to try and get the wither stuck on some geometry, so I began swimming towards land. It was getting stuck briefly, but not enough for a full escape. Just when I thought it was over for me, a dolphin appeared and boosted my swim speed so I could get away. It felt like one of those real-world stories you hear about dolphins saving swimmers from shark attacks. It was definitely my lucky day. Using my newfound speed, I eventually swam back to the main highway. No more delay. It was time to fish for another saddle, since horses can outrun withers in most cases. After about an hour, I managed to get one. Hopefully, there would be a horse somewhere down the road. From here, the highway was starting to get kind of crooked, but at least it was still going. I soon found myself at the 30K milestone, which was just a floating platform with a small farm. Just outside the milestone, I saw a horse near an old nether portal that someone had abandoned, so I put my saddle to good use. The horse ended up being pretty fast, so I was hoping this would speed up some of the more boring parts of the highway. This ocean was generated in a very old version of Minecraft when practically endless oceans were a feature, not a bug. For thousands of blocks, it was nothing but water, cobblestone, and signs. Upon reaching 36K, I finally hit land and everyone was under the impression that the ocean was finally over. But just 100 blocks ahead, there it was again. No escape. There were long stretches of absolutely nothing, but I still had to pay attention the entire time in case I stumbled upon another wither. Eventually, I hit the 40K milestone. After climbing some stairs to investigate a melon farm, I realized it was inside a massive replica of the famous Wrath Outpost, which had originally been built at spawn 10 years ago. A build that had once been considered a major achievement on the server was now a highway rest stop. There was a deeper meaning in that somewhere, but my brain had been smoothed out by all the ocean, so I kept moving. For 10,000 blocks, there was nothing but water and random blocks until I reached the 50K milestone. Other than a small farm, there really wasn't much to it. After watching a zombie grief itself, I knew it was time to continue. Shortly after, I found a dead body on the highway with their XP still floating there. Luckily, they dropped some diamonds. Upon reaching a griefed rest stop, I was able to craft diamond armor, which would give me a much better chance of survival from here on out. Other than finding more ruins and odd builds from time to time, there was nothing of substance to be found on this stretch of the highway. The most entertaining thing I found was a massive underwater piglin rave happening near a nether portal. Pretty weird. The 60K milestone was nothing more than some pillars of water and a griefed skyscraper. It was now roughly 5 times the length of the previous highway. How far was this thing going to go? At 65,000 there was land, but just like last time, it didn't last long, and I was back to the sea. I was still finding signs from previous explorers that, like me, had slowly been descending into madness from this road. The 70K milestone was a simple cobblestone post with some signs and lanterns, and that was it. Just ahead, some signs were left behind by a player named Miles that claimed this was the end of the highway roughly 1 year ago, so I knew we were finally getting close to the end. A few thousand blocks down the road, I ran into a wither, but this time I was fast enough to escape thanks to my horse. But I walked over the remains of someone that wasn't so lucky. At 76K, the highway had a large section that had been griefed, and without the blocks to repair it, I was forced to abandon my horse, though I did take the saddle. Despite there still being some interesting things to see, the highway continued to degrade. As expected, the 80K milestone looked like a giant pile of trash, but yet, off in the distance, I saw something massive. Someone had built a giant statue that was still standing, and despite a little bit of damage, it was magnificent. Staying on the road this long had been worth it just to see something like this. But things went from magnificent to weird very quickly, as I found a random pair of sniffers just chilling under a netherrack bridge. At this point, I was just happy to have some variety in my journey. But as I followed that bridge, suddenly it came to an end. I thought maybe it was just another griefed section, but as I traveled 1,000 blocks ahead, I realized it was actually over. That netherrack was the true end of the Northeast Highway, coming in at 83,100 blocks, with a true diagonal distance of 117,521. Way longer than the first one, but still, none of these highways had reached 100K yet. After putting away my gear safely, it was time to travel back to spawn and hit the second most popular highway, the Northwest. Back at spawn, I carefully made my way over to an e-chest and pulled out my elytra just so I could get to the highway. Once there, I put it back into storage, but made sure to pull out the rest of my basic gear. I was once again met with massive mountains of cobblestone. Having gear at this stage made the first part of this highway less stressful than the others, but I still had to be alert. After finding another horse, it made me realize just how common they actually have become in the spawn region. No complaints from me though. At 4,100 blocks, I found the ruins of a town, and after getting closer to investigate, I actually saw an LA flying around. Its original owner must have either died or fled the griefing, but I'd never seen one so close to spawn before. After taking in the sights, I kept moving, but not before looting another dead body for some extra food. Just from all the builds I kept running into, it was obvious that this was a far more active highway than the previous two. Leisure's data was definitely lining up with what I was finding. The 5K milestone, as expected, was another set of floating platforms in the exact same style as the other highways. Not far ahead was a griefed sanctuary with tons of cherry blossom trees, but a wither prevented me from looking around the place. Luckily, my horse was fast enough to get away. After all the chaos, things became quiet for a while. There wasn't much going on other than the occasional grief or weird block formation. But I did notice that the obsidian part of the highway was lasting longer than the previous ones. After finding the first ungriefed farm of the highway, I soon hit the 10K milestone. Other than signs left by players, there were also numerous crosses littered all over the landscape. At least it wasn't, what you would normally see on Anarchy servers. From here, the obsidian part of the road had ended and I was now on cobblestone. Now throughout this journey so far, I had passed many mobs on the highways, but for some reason, as I was getting ready to pass by a creeper, my horse decided it was the perfect time to stop moving and stretch its legs. My horse had betrayed me. After a few minutes, I managed to return to my dead body. I had now died at least once on all the highways so far. Hopefully, that would be the last time. I managed to find another horse nearby, but I had to be far more careful around creepers. I came across a large area of what players refer to as Swiss cheese ice. The server has been through so many versions of Minecraft that some biomes close to spawn generated as cold biomes 15 years ago. But eventually, they changed to warmer biomes, so sites like this are pretty common in the greater spawn region. After swapping horses for a faster one, the highway went on for a while as a bridge high above the terrain, so mob spawning was less of an issue. This bridge went on for thousands of blocks with many old builds visible in the distance. Cool to look at, but not worth stopping to investigate. But at 17,400, I did see an old town in the distance, so I took a peek. It was completely abandoned, but the fact that there were no modern blocks in it meant that this thing must have been ancient. The next few thousand blocks looked similar, more ruins with plenty of craters around. But for being one of the more traveled diagonals, things were pretty calm for a while. It was pretty relaxing to just look over at some of the interesting ruins without actually leaving the highway. Upon reaching the 20k milestone, I looked around for anything interesting, and there happened to be an obsidian cabin nearby with signs left by travelers. Obsidian may not be the prettiest block, but it sure is useful. For thousands of blocks after this, things continue to be pretty quiet. I would switch between enjoying the beautiful scenery and then getting PTSD anytime I was next to creepers. The 25k milestone was just a simple farm and some signs left by other players, but still worth it to stop. The road was becoming more random in the materials it was made out of, but was not showing signs of ending anytime soon. At 28,000 blocks, I saw someone had planted mangrove trees in old terrain, which as a Florida man, I could appreciate. The 30k milestone looked very imposing directly ahead of me, but as I reached it, I was met with a very calm garden area. I definitely wasn't expecting it. I was making much better time on this highway than the previous ones, since there was less to see, especially when going through massive tunnels that cut through mountains and hills. Around 35k, I reached what was once the end of the highway, but apparently, a player named Waterman had taken it upon himself to single-handedly expand the highway. But what's interesting is that Waterman returned and claimed the highway had been expanded to 300k. That would imply it was over 3 times the length of the Northeast Highway, which would be insane if true, but I made a note of it. The 40k milestone looked ruined from the outside, but once again, on the inside, it was a garden. This one was even more intact, but when a creeper started approaching me, I had to cut my visit short. As I went further, the road alternated from massive ruins to serene nature, and this back and forth went on for quite some time. There was plenty of biome variety, which made things interesting at least, but I was just glad to not be traveling a giant ocean again. I found more signs left by Waterman as he kept working on the highway. It was wild how just one person was taking the road this far. When the 50k milestone appeared, it was one of the weirdest looking ones I had ever seen. Almost like someone had attempted to make a giant cube but was only partially successful. Visually, it was very striking though. The inside was a large obsidian pyramid with things scattered about. If this highway was going to reach 100k, then it meant we were halfway there. Just ahead, I found another sign from the mysterious Waterman that we had been following this entire time. I could tell there was still plenty to see. There were some ocean chunks this far out, but land was always visible right off to the side, so it didn't really feel like an ocean, especially when I was back on land again in only a few hundred blocks. There were more farms, more crosses for some reason, and also some bats which had been brought back from extinction thanks to server updates. At 59k, I came across a dead body that had some diamond items, as well as an extra saddle. Lucky find. And just down the road was the 60k milestone, but shockingly, there was an active base in the distance, made by a player named Jason1. Upon approaching it, there was plenty of livestock like cows, pigs, and chickens. Right above them, the house was filled with food, beds, and other useful tools for travelers. A sign out front said Jason had completed this base only a couple of weeks ago, so I truly lucked out by finding this place before it was destroyed. Bases like this never last, but the travelers that come across them will never forget them. Nice work, Jason. The stretch of road from 60k to 70k was pretty quiet. The only real point of interest was the 6-6 repeating milestone. I was just impressed at the quality of the road that Waterman had been building. It cut right through mountains and was extremely horse-friendly. Despite never meeting this person, I was really admiring their work ethic. The 70k milestone was underneath a mountain, so the space was a little tight, but at least it was cozy, especially with a nice fireplace nearby. At 72k, an old lava cast had been transformed into a lush farm with plenty of melons and even a statue of an axolotl. There was also another massive farm at 77k, but this one had been robbed of most of its crops. Up the road, the 80k milestone was pretty chaotic, and with hostile mobs crawling around, I didn't really feel like stopping. I found an old house covered in vines, but what really made me pull over was what I saw at 83k. There were frogs on the side of the road. This was actually my first time encountering them on 2b2t ever. They weren't exactly an animal I would go out of my way to find, but it only took 3 different highways for me to stumble upon some. Sometimes the fact that the server is finally running on modern versions of Minecraft doesn't feel real. But after the novelty had worn off, I kept it moving. In that same swamp, I came across another sign from Waterman. He believed that his highway was now the longest of the diagonals. Well, I knew for a fact it was now longer than at least 2 of them, but now there was no doubt in my mind. This highway was probably going to hit 100k, and I was going to lose my bet. 90k was nothing more than a griefed nether portal on some ocean, which clearly had been there before the highway's existence, but that last 10k went quick as I found more signs. 9k left, 8k left, 7k, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and finally in the distance, the 100k milestone. Signs on the inside were rejoicing, just like I was doing. Waterman had single-handedly extended one of the shortest diagonal highways from 35k all the way out to 100. What a legend. Looking around, there was actually an old town with a Valkyrian eagle fountain still intact. But otherwise, things were pretty rough. So the Northwest Highway was now the longest, going at least 100k by 100k, or roughly 141,000 blocks diagonally. And it was clear it went even farther than this. But we had reached the criteria for stopping on this one. It was now time to see how far the final highway was going to go. The most popular and therefore the most dangerous. Upon returning to 0-0, I did some parkour to get to an e-chest nearby. I would use my elytra to get to the start of the Southeast Highway. After finding a platform with another e-chest, I put my wings away and started walking. But I actually found another horse right away. The most traveled diagonal highway had a lot of griefing, so I had to break cobblestone just so my horse would fit through the tunnels in some places. It became so tedious that eventually I just went around and over them. A little more dangerous due to the mobs, but it would save a lot of time. But these lava casts were all I could see until I reached the 5K milestone. But this one was different. It was still mainly obsidian platforms, but it was surrounded by windows, with the outside being completely submerged in water. I wondered if this is what the previous 3 had looked like at one point. After the milestone, it was pretty chill for a few thousand blocks, nothing but ruined landscapes and some more massive obsidian builds. It was clear this quadrant had seen a ton of activity over the past few years. At 7.5K, there were some gigantic ruins with a pyramid made out of nether portals and even a large ring farm with what appeared to be a griefed statue in the middle. It would have been cool to see this place before it was destroyed. After passing by one of the scariest lava casts I'd ever seen and exploring more ruins off the side of the highway, I eventually made it to the 10K milestone. But like the rest of what I'd seen so far, it was a crater. Right after, the obsidian road had become cobblestone, and while I was expecting more chaos, I actually came across a fully intact fishing hut. So naturally, after looking around, I had to throw out my line, at least for a little bit. I continued through player-made canyons, past massive wheat farms, and a road that was crooked in some places. I eventually made it to 15K and shortly after, 20K. From this point on, things got really random. From massive farms that were still active, to frozen swamps and their griefed settlements, there was definitely more variety in what I was coming across on this diagonal. But as I was traveling, suddenly a player flew right past me. Landing just ahead, I cautiously approached. It was a player named Arabic Airlines, who instead of killing me, gave me free supplies. They must have seen me on horseback from above and wanted to make my life easier. I thanked them for their generosity, and just as quickly as they had appeared, they flew off into the distance. Despite the gift, I was going to continue on horseback. For me, the journey was just as important as the destination, so I deposited most of what was given to me. The 25K milestone was in the process of being lava casted, so there was no way to go directly through it. I had to go all the way around. Just down the road were the ruins of a stone structure that had also been covered in lava at one point. But the next place I came across, a settlement called Terror Town, was in much better shape, and based on the blocks used, seemed to be actually somewhat old. But as I left, I noticed the road quality was diminishing. It would range from a single block of cobblestone to sometimes nothing more than dirt and grass. Tunnels and bridges across water and ice would have the most work put into them, but everything else was the bare minimum, at least all the way up to the 30K milestone. From here, the infrastructure did improve a bit, such as someone slicing a path right through a mountain. I suspected that instead of just having a single builder such as Waterman, this highway was just put together by the random travelers that were using it at the time, which would explain the varying levels of road quality. But regardless, it continued and led me to more player-made structures, some in better shape than others. One minute I would be passing by a memorial for someone's cat, and the next I would be at a food truck someone had placed randomly. Farther down the road, I would find weird redstone ore formations floating over ice. The build quality was just as diverse as the road quality. The 40K milestone was looking very weathered alongside an old base that was connected to it. From here, the next 10,000 blocks were mainly empty, although there would be an occasional set of ruins to explore. But what I would find at the 50K milestone would take me by complete surprise. The milestone was an active base, but not only was it active, the builder was online. But as I approached them, I realized they were AFK, something you never want to be caught doing on Anarchy servers. I decided it was worth the risk to try and befriend them even though they could easily kill me. Eating melons didn't get their attention, but opening a shulker certainly did. Luckily, they were friendly. After turning my chat back on, we had a short conversation. Weirdest Mocker had cleaned up and rebuilt this entire milestone single-handedly in order to offer travelers a safe haven from the chaos in both the overworld and the nether. After revealing I was headed to the end of the diagonal highway, I was offered extra supplies which I politely declined since I already had what I needed. Not wanting to reveal my true identity, I simply warned them that the milestone could see more travelers very soon. We wished each other luck on our respective goals, and I continued on my journey. So now that was 2 different players I had come across on this specific highway. Leisure's data about this being the most traveled diagonal was looking more and more accurate. But despite the activity, for the next 10,000 blocks, there was nothing. I had gone far enough east that there were now massive oceans similar to the second highway I traveled, the northeast. This diagonal bridge over water led me to 60K, which was just a simple nomad hut. But right after this milestone, I came to some signs that implied the end of the highway had been here within the past year, but had since been extended. I knew I must be getting close to the end. As I continued on the scuffed bridge, I kept encountering more false finishes to the highway. Anytime someone stopped building, another traveler would pick up the slack. Around 63,500 blocks, I encountered a large wall of bamboo, and upon investigating, found a pretty intact base, but it had been made using more modern blocks, so it must have been built not too long ago. After admiring more of the sights, it was full speed ahead on the road again. Despite passing by some old bases, the road was barely hanging on in some places, being nothing more than just a line of blocks. But somehow it just kept going. It eventually led me to 69K, which I can't actually show you or else YouTube would get mad. Let's just say it was an interesting tower. But as I passed 70K, there was no actual milestone, just more of a path that could barely be considered a road. Yet stubbornly, it continued for thousands of blocks. I was still finding interesting builds along the way, but I was hyper-focused on reaching the end. After a lackluster 80K milestone, it started to seem like this thing might go all the way. But soon, I found a sign claiming someone had run out of blocks in this very spot just 2 months ago. The end was near. As I rode past some mobs, suddenly, the cherry bridge stopped. Was this it? Just to make sure, I swam about 1,000 blocks ahead, and there was nothing. So the true end of the Southeast Highway was at 80,700, roughly 114,000 blocks diagonally. Despite being the most popular diagonal, it was actually the second shortest, which was quite surprising to me. But now I had traveled all 4 of 2b2t's diagonal highways on a fresh account. From shortest to longest, it was the southwest, followed by southeast, northeast, and then northwest, which still leaves the mystery. How far does the Northwest Road go thanks to Waterman? I guess that's something for you to discover. All you need to do is take that first step and survive.